Hello everyone, and welcome to my BNB CBS Gossip 24 channel. Steffy shuts down Hope's plea, Brooke reels over quitter Katie. Steffy Forrester Finnegan will shut down Hope Logan Spencer's plea while Brooke Logan Forrester reels over quitter Katie Spencer. For starters, Hope will remain in shock over Steffy's latest news. Steffy just informed Hope that Thomas Forrester is back and that Deacon Sharp doesn't have a future at Forrester Creations, so Hope will naturally object. Hope may acknowledge that Thomas is an excellent designer, but she'll object to him coming in this late in the game and throwing off her plans for the line. Steffy will feel like Hope's just uncomfortable with Thomas because of her history with him, so she won't think personal drama should affect how they do business. This is about what's best for Hope for the future, so Steffy will insist Thomas and Zend Forrester Dominguez are the perfect design duo for the relaunch. Hope will at least think Deke should stick around and contribute to the team, but Steffy will shut down her plea and insist there's no room for him. Steffy's decision will be final, so her feud with Hope will definitely be bubbling back up by the end of all this. Next on Friday's BNB episode, Katie will give Brooke updates on a big change and launch some conflict between them as well. Now that Katie has decided to accept Bill Spencer's offer and start her own fashion house, she'll fill Brooke in and leave her sister reeling. Although Katie was hoping Brooke would be supportive, she may get a confused and upset response instead. Brooke may think this seems like an extreme reaction to the outside PR team situation and wonder why Katie would want to become their competitor. Nevertheless, the bold and the beautiful spoilers say Katie will stand her ground now that she's made her choice, so Brooke and Ridge Forrester will just have to deal with her new career path. Steffy shuts down Hope's plea, Brooke reels over quitter Katie unfolds as a sweeping, emotionally charged chapter that braids together power struggles, wounded loyalties, and seismic career pivots, all set against the relentless churn of ambition and history that defines the world of Forrester Creations and the intertwined lives of the Logans, Forresters, and Spencers, beginning with Hope Logan Spencer reeling from the shock of Steffy Forrester Finnegan's decisive announcement that Thomas Forrester is back in the building and that Deacon Sharp has no future at the fashion house. A double blow that lands with particular force because it strikes at Hope's sense of control, safety, and creative autonomy just as she believed she had steadied the course for Hope for the future. Hope's objection is immediate and layered, rooted not merely in professional logistics but in the accumulated weight of personal history, since while she can acknowledge Thomas's undeniable talent and the way his designs have historically elevated collections, she cannot ignore the timing of his return, which feels to her like an 11th-hour disruption that threatens to unravel carefully laid plans, destabilize team dynamics, and resurrect emotional landmines she has spent years trying to defuse. Yet Steffy, firm and unyielding, reframes Hope's concerns as discomfort masquerading as business prudence, asserting that personal drama has no place in decisions that must prioritize the health and success of the brand, especially one as vulnerable and symbolically important as Hope for the future. A line that has weathered cancellations, relaunches, and public scrutiny and therefore requires, in Steffy's view, the strongest possible creative leadership regardless of interpersonal baggage. From Steffy's perspective, this is not about favoritism or punishment but about strategy, about recognizing that Thomas and Zend Forrester Dominguez together represent a rare alignment of vision, technical skill, and legacy, a design duo capable of injecting fresh energy while honoring the Forrester name, and thus she insists, coolly, confidently, that they are the perfect team to steer the relaunch toward relevance and profitability, a stance that leaves Hope feeling sidelined and unheard as she tries to argue for continuity and collaboration, at least hoping that Deacon, whom she affectionately calls Deke and who has proven himself eager, supportive, and creatively engaged, might be allowed to stay on and contribute, if not as a lead then as a valued part of the process. But Steffy shuts down that plea without hesitation, declaring there is no room for him, that sentimentality cannot dictate staffing, and that the company must move forward with a leaner, sharper focus, a finality in her tone that signals the end of negotiations and reignites the simmering feud between her and Hope, a rivalry that has ebbed and flowed over the years but now threatens to bubble back up with renewed intensity as Hope grapples with the realization that her influence is waning and that the line bearing her name is increasingly being shaped by forces beyond her control. The tension in these scenes is not merely about who designs what but about power, trust, and identity, about whether Hope is truly the steward of her own brand or a figurehead subject to the whims of Forrester leadership, and whether Steffy's brand of pragmatic authority, honed by years of navigating family drama and corporate warfare, has hardened into a rigidity that leaves little room for empathy, even as she believes she is acting in the best interest of the company and, paradoxically, of Hope herself. As this conflict reaches a boiling point, the episode pivots to another seismic shift, this time between sisters, as Katie Spencer delivers news to Brooke Logan Forrester that sends shockwaves through their relationship, revealing that she has accepted Bill Spencer's offer to start her own fashion house. A decision born from frustration, wounded pride, and a desire for independence after feeling undermined and sidelined by the handling of the outside PR team situation. And while Katie approaches the conversation hoping for understanding and support, perhaps even validation that her leap into entrepreneurship is an act of courage rather than betrayal, Brooke's reaction is anything but reassuring. As she reels with confusion and hurt, struggling to reconcile Katie's choice with her own loyalty to Forrester Creations and her belief that family unity should supersede competitive impulses, Brooke questions whether this drastic move is truly necessary, wondering aloud why Katie would choose to become a competitor rather than fight from within, interpreting the decision as an extreme overreaction that could fracture relationships and ignite unnecessary conflict. Yet Katie, resolute and clear-eyed, stands her ground, asserting that she has made her choice after careful consideration and that she refuses to remain in a position where her voice and expertise are marginalized, emphasizing that this new path is about self-respect and agency rather than revenge. The sisters' exchange crackles with unspoken history, with echoes of past betrayals, reconciliations, and divergent philosophies about love, work, and loyalty, as Brooke, ever the champion of Forrester stability and the complicated marriage she shares with Rich Forrester, worries about the ripple effects Katie's departure will have not only on the business but on their family dynamic, knowing that Ridge will be forced to confront the reality of a formidable new competitor led by someone who knows the inner workings of the industry intimately, while Katie steels herself for the backlash, prepared to weather skepticism and disappointment because she believes that forging her own path is the only way to reclaim her sense of purpose. Together, these parallel storylines, Steffy's uncompromising shutdown of Hope's plea and Katie's bold exit that leaves Brooke reeling, paint a portrait of a world in flux, where old alliances are tested, new rivalries are born, and the characters are forced to confront uncomfortable truths about who holds power, who gets heard, and what sacrifices are required to pursue success and self-fulfillment in an industry that rarely allows for both, underscoring the central theme that in the glittering yet cutthroat realm of high fashion, decisions made in boardrooms reverberate through hearts and homes alike, ensuring that by the end of it all, nothing, and no one, emerges unchanged. As the fallout from these decisions continues to ripple outward, the emotional stakes only deepen, pulling each character further into a web of consequence and self-examination, because Steffy's hardline stance does not simply end the discussion with Hope but instead lingers like a bruise that grows more tender with time, forcing Hope to sit alone with the realization that the company she once believed championed her values is now moving forward in a way that feels eerily familiar, echoing past moments when her voice was minimized in favor of expediency and legacy. And as she reflects on Steffy's insistence that Thomas and Zend are the perfect duo, Hope cannot help but wonder whether perfection, in Steffy's eyes, has less to do with innovation and more to do with bloodlines and control, a thought that unsettles her deeply because it challenges the very premise on which Hope for the future was built, an inclusive, forward-thinking brand that was supposed to transcend old Forrester power dynamics. This internal conflict simmers as Hope considers Thomas himself, recognizing that while time has passed and wounds have ostensibly healed, the emotional residue of their shared past is not so easily erased, and the idea of being professionally dependent on someone who once caused her so much pain feels like an unfair burden. Yet she also knows that pushing back too hard risks making her seem emotional or unprofessional, a narrative Steffy has already subtly implied, leaving Hope trapped between asserting her boundaries and preserving her credibility, a tightrope she has walked for most of her adult life. Meanwhile, Thomas's return carries its own complicated weight, because while he may genuinely be focused on redemption and creative excellence, he cannot be blind to the tension his presence creates, and though he may present himself as calm and collaborative, there is an undercurrent of inevitability to his reinstatement, as if the Forrester machine has once again decided that his talent outweighs any collateral damage, reinforcing the idea that certain people will always be welcomed back into the fold no matter the cost to others, an idea that quietly reinforces Hope's growing sense of displacement. Zend, caught in the middle, becomes an unwitting symbol of what Steffy claims to value, merit and teamwork, yet even his involvement underscores the imbalance. Because unlike Hope or Deacon, Zend fits neatly into the Forrester narrative without stirring old scandals or emotional discomfort, making him the safe choice in a room full of volatile history. Deacon's exclusion, however, cuts Hope the deepest, because it feels personal in a way that business decisions often masquerade as not being, and Steffy's refusal to even entertain the idea of his continued involvement sends a clear message that certain associations will never be forgiven or legitimized, no matter how much effort is made to prove growth and loyalty, leaving Hope to grapple with guilt for having encouraged Deacon to believe he had a future there and anger that she was powerless to protect him, emotions that threaten to spill over into open resentment as she begins to question whether her partnership with Forrester Creations is sustainable at all. As this tension builds, Steffy remains outwardly composed, convinced that decisive leadership requires emotional detachment and that second-guessing herself would only weaken her authority, yet even she is not immune to the undercurrents of doubt, because somewhere beneath her certainty lies the awareness that shutting Hope down so completely may fracture trust beyond repair, and while she tells herself that Hope will eventually see the wisdom of her choices, there is a flicker of unease at the possibility that this time, Hope might not simply adapt and move on. This unease mirrors, in an almost poetic symmetry, the turmoil unfolding across town as Brooke processes Katie's stunning announcement, because for Brooke, Katie's decision to start a competing fashion house feels like both a personal rejection and a destabilizing threat to everything she has fought to protect, forcing her to confront uncomfortable questions about whether her unwavering loyalty to Forrester Creations has come at the expense of truly supporting her sister's autonomy. Brooke's initial reaction, colored by shock and defensiveness, masks a deeper fear that Katie's move exposes cracks in the Forrester empire, cracks Brooke has long worked to plaster over with optimism and perseverance, and as she replays the conversation in her mind, she begins to wonder whether she dismissed Katie's frustrations too easily, whether her instinct to defend the status quo blinded her to the ways Katie felt sidelined and undervalued, yet pride and habit make it difficult for Brooke to reverse course, especially when doing so would require acknowledging that Forrester leadership, including Ridge, may have mishandled the situation in ways that drove Katie away. Katie, for her part, braces herself for the fallout, aware that her decision will not only strain her relationship with Brooke but also place her squarely in the crosshairs of an industry that rarely forgives perceived disloyalty, yet she feels a growing sense of resolve as she imagines building something of her own from the ground up. Free from the shadow of Forrester dominance and the constant need to compromise her instincts, and this resolve hardens each time she reminds herself that accepting Bill's offer was not an impulsive act but a calculated step toward reclaiming her professional identity, even if it means being labeled a quitter by those who cannot or will not understand her motivations. Bill Spencer's involvement adds another layer of complexity, because while his support provides Katie with resources and confidence, it also fuels Brooke's suspicion that this new venture is less about empowerment and more about spite or manipulation, a suspicion that threatens to reopen old wounds tied to Bill's history of interference and chaos. And although Katie insists that she is entering this partnership on her own terms, she cannot fully escape the reality that Bill's name will inevitably color perceptions of her brand, turning what she hopes will be a fresh start into a lightning rod for controversy. Ridge, caught between Brooke's turmoil and the practical implications of Katie's departure, begins to sense that the ground beneath Forrester Creations is shifting, as first Hope's disenchantment and now Katie's exit signal a broader pattern of talented women feeling pushed aside by decisions made without their full buy-in, a pattern he may be reluctant to acknowledge but cannot ignore indefinitely, especially as competition intensifies and public perception becomes increasingly unforgiving. As these storylines converge, the atmosphere becomes charged with anticipation, because each character stands at a crossroads where the choices they make next will define not only their professional trajectories but their personal relationships, with Hope contemplating whether to continue fighting for a line that no longer feels like hers, Steffy doubling down on a leadership style that prioritizes results over reconciliation, Brooke struggling to balance familial loyalty with institutional allegiance, and Katie stepping boldly into the unknown with equal parts fear and determination. and in this charged landscape, every conversation, every decision carries amplified weight, setting the stage for confrontations that will force truths into the open and test whether the bonds that once held these families together can withstand the pressures of ambition, resentment, and change, ensuring that the consequences of shutting down a plea or walking away from a familiar path will reverberate far beyond the walls of any fashion house, reshaping alliances and redefining what success truly means in a world where legacy and reinvention are forever at odds. In the days that follow, the atmosphere around Forrester Creations grows increasingly brittle, as if the building itself senses the fractures forming within its walls, and Hope finds herself moving through meetings and fittings with a forced composure that barely conceals the storm churning beneath her calm exterior. Because every sketch laid on the table and every decision made without her input reinforces the nagging suspicion that hope for the future is slowly slipping from her grasp, becoming less an expression of her vision and more a commodity molded to fit Steffi's strategic agenda. This sense of displacement intensifies when Thomas begins integrating himself into the workflow with an ease that feels almost unsettling, his confidence rooted not just in his talent but in the unspoken assurance that he belongs there, an assurance Hope has never fully felt despite the line bearing her name, and though Thomas makes a point of keeping interactions professional and restrained, perhaps even overly courteous, Hope cannot ignore how quickly others defer to his opinions, how his ideas are treated as solutions rather than suggestions, creating a dynamic in which she feels subtly outmaneuvered even when no overt conflict occurs. Privately, Hope wrestles with the fear that voicing her discomfort will only validate Steffi's belief that personal issues are clouding her judgment, so she swallows her frustration and channels it inward, yet this restraint comes at a cost, manifesting in sleepless nights and moments of doubt where she questions whether staying silent is a form of self-betrayal, especially when she considers Deacon, now conspicuously absent from the halls of Forrester Creations, his departure a tangible reminder of how swiftly Steffi's decisions can erase someone from the narrative. Deacon, though trying to be supportive and understanding, struggles with his own sense of rejection, and while he assures Hope that he doesn't blame her, that he knew the risks of stepping into the Forrester world, Hope cannot shake the guilt of having encouraged him to believe he had a place there, a guilt that festers into resentment toward a system that seems to punish vulnerability while rewarding legacy, further complicating her already strained relationship with Steffi. Steffi, meanwhile, remains steadfast, projecting confidence in public and dismissing murmurs of discontent as growing pains inherent in any major transition. Yet even as she champions the Thomas End partnership in boardrooms and interviews, she becomes increasingly aware of the subtle shift in Hope's demeanor, a withdrawal that suggests not defiance but disengagement, and this realization unsettles her more than open rebellion would have, because it hints at the possibility that Hope may be quietly preparing to walk away rather than continue fighting a battle she feels she cannot win. This possibility lingers like an unspoken threat, one Steffi refuses to acknowledge openly, choosing instead to double down on productivity metrics and launch timelines, convincing herself that success will eventually smooth over any lingering hurt, even as a small voice inside her wonders whether she is repeating patterns learned from her own upbringing, patterns that equate strength with emotional suppression and decisiveness with moral certainty. Across town, Brooke's turmoil deepens as the reality of Katie's new venture begins to crystallize, transforming from an abstract idea into a concrete threat as rumors circulate and industry insiders whisper about Katie's plans, and each whisper feels like a personal affront to Brooke, who has long prided herself on being a unifying force within her family and within Forrester Creations, a role now slipping through her fingers as she realizes that her initial reaction may have pushed Katie further away rather than drawing her back. Brooke's attempts to revisit the conversation are tentative and fraught, colored by an unspoken tension that makes every word feel like a potential misstep, and when she suggests that Katie reconsider, framing the move as risky and emotionally driven, Katie hears not concern but condescension, interpreting Brooke's words as yet another attempt to diminish her agency, and this misalignment of intentions and perceptions widens the rift between them, turning what could have been a supportive dialogue into a battleground of old grievances and unmet expectations. Katie, buoyed by Bill's unwavering encouragement and the intoxicating promise of creative freedom, begins assembling her team with a quiet determination, reaching out to designers and strategists who share her frustration with the Forrester status quo. And with each new ally she recruits, her confidence grows, reinforcing her belief that stepping away was not an act of abandonment but of self-preservation, even as she braces herself for the inevitable backlash once her plans become public. Bill, ever the provocateur, relishes the disruption this new fashion house represents, framing it as a necessary challenge to complacency and a chance for Katie to finally step out of the shadows cast by Brooke and the Forresters. Yet his involvement remains a double-edged sword, because while his resources and bravado provide momentum, they also threaten to overshadow Katie's vision, forcing her to constantly assert that this is her dream, not his vendetta, a distinction she knows will be scrutinized by both the press and her family. Ridge, increasingly caught in the crossfire, finds himself questioning decisions he once defended without hesitation, as the cumulative effect of Hope's disillusionment and Katie's departure forces him to confront the possibility that Forrester Creations' leadership culture may be driving talent away rather than fostering loyalty, and though he resists the notion at first, attributing these conflicts to personal sensitivities and external pressures, the nagging sense that something fundamental is amiss refuses to dissipate, particularly as he observes Brooke's distress and recognizes his own role in perpetuating dynamics that prioritize control over collaboration. This growing self-awareness does little to immediately change the trajectory of events, however, because entrenched habits and power structures are not easily dismantled, and as launch dates loom and competitive tensions escalate, there is little room for introspection amid the relentless demands of the fashion world. For Hope, the breaking point inches closer as she begins to imagine a future untethered from Forrester Creations, a thought that once felt unthinkable but now carries a strange allure, promising relief from the constant need to justify her feelings and fight for relevance. And while she has yet to articulate this possibility to anyone, the mere act of considering it marks a profound shift in her identity, signaling that the loyalty she once offered unquestioningly now comes with conditions. Steffy senses this shift even if she cannot name it, and in rare moments of solitude, she wonders whether leadership requires more than decisiveness, whether it demands a willingness to sit with discomfort and acknowledge the human cost of strategic choices. Yet pride and fear of vulnerability keep these questions firmly locked away, ensuring that any reckoning will come not through quiet reflection but through confrontation and consequence. As these parallel journeys unfold, the stage is set for a collision of ambitions and emotions, because the fashion world thrives on reinvention and rivalry, and with Katie preparing to unveil a bold new competitor, Hope contemplating her own escape.